I thought I was being clever with my comeback. The coffee shop was buzzing with the usual Tuesday morning crowd, and I'd just delivered what I considered a witty response to her comment about my youthful appearance. "Age is just a number," I said with a grin, expecting maybe a laugh or an eye roll. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, smiled in a way that made my stomach flip, and said, "Good, because I'm 53 and very interested in you." That moment changed everything I thought I knew about attraction, assumptions, and what happens when life throws you a curveball you never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday in downtown Portland. I'd grabbed my usual table at Grind Coffee on Morrison Street, the one by the window where I could watch the city wake up while pretending to work on my freelance graphic design projects. At 28, I had the luxury of flexible hours and the curse of irregular income, which meant nursing a single coffee for 2 hours wasn't just acceptable, it was financially responsible. I was deep into redesigning a logo for a local bakery when she walked in. She moved with the kind of confidence that immediately caught my attention. Not hurried like most of the morning rush, but deliberate, like she owned every step. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably wasn't, and she wore a charcoal blazer that suggested she had somewhere important to be. She ordered something complicated, a cortado with oat milk and an extra shot, while I tried not to stare. There's something magnetic about people who know exactly what they want, whether it's coffee or anything else. When she turned to find a seat, our eyes met for just a second, and she offered the kind of smile that's gone before you can decide if it was meant for you. The coffee shop was packed, every table occupied by laptop warriors and business meetings. She stood there for a moment, scanning the room, and I found myself doing something completely out of character. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "You can share if you want," I said, closing my laptop slightly to make room. "I'm not using the whole table." She hesitated for just a moment, then walked over. "That's very kind. Thank you. I'm Victoria." "Marcus," I replied, suddenly conscious of my wrinkled flannel shirt next to her polished appearance. Victoria settled into the chair with practiced grace, pulling out a leather portfolio and what looked like architectural drawings. She worked quietly for about 10 minutes, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting that looked like it belonged on wedding invitations. I tried to focus on my own work, but found myself stealing glances at her profile, the way she tapped her pen against her lip when thinking. "Interior designer?" I finally asked, nodding toward her sketches. "Landscape architect," she corrected, but not unkindly. "Working on a residential project in the West Hills. These clients want to transform their entire backyard into something that looks like Tuscany, complete with olive trees that probably won't survive our winters." I laughed. "Sounds like they've got more money than sense." "Most of them do," she said with a wry smile. "But it pays well enough to indulge their fantasies. What about you?" "Let me guess. Tech startup?" "Freelance graphic design," I said, opening my laptop to show her the bakery logo. "Nothing as glamorous as recreating Italy in Oregon." She leaned forward to look at my screen, and I caught a hint of her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that made me suddenly aware of my own coffee breath. "That's actually quite nice. Clean lines, good typography, very professional." The compliment caught me off guard. I was used to clients nitpicking every detail, not genuine appreciation from a stranger. "Thanks. It's for a place called Rising. Dough over on Division." "I know that place. Their croissants are incredible." She paused, studying the logo more carefully. "You've captured something about them. The warmth, the craftsmanship. It's not easy to convey personality through design." We fell into conversation after that, the kind that flows naturally between two people who found an unexpected connection. She told me about the challenges of working with wealthy clients who had strong opinions but no practical knowledge. I shared stories about logo revisions that seemed to multiply like bacteria, each iteration moving further from anything resembling good design. Victoria had a way of listening that made you want to keep talking. She asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just waiting for her turn to speak. When I mentioned growing up in small-town Idaho, she wanted to know about the transition to city life. When she talked about her daughter studying abroad in Barcelona, there was pride in her voice that went beyond typical parental bragging. "She's 25, Victoria said, showing me a photo on her phone. "Getting her master's in art history. I keep telling her she's wasting her time with all that education, but secretly, I'm incredibly proud." The woman in the photo looked like a younger version of Victoria, with the same confident smile and intelligent eyes. "She looks like you," I said, then immediately worried it sounded like a line. Everyone says that, though she definitely got her father's stubborn streak. Victoria's expression shifted slightly, and I sensed there was a story there she wasn't ready to share. Time moves differently while we talk. The morning crowd thinned out, replaced by the lunch rush, and somehow we'd been sitting there for 3 hours. My coffee had gone cold long ago, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. "I should probably get going," Victoria finally said, though she made no move to pack up her things. "I have a client meeting at 2. "Right, of course." I started to close my laptop, already missing the conversation. "This was nice," she said, gathering her drawings. "I don't usually end up having 3-hour conversations with strangers." "Neither do I admitted. "But you're not really a stranger anymore." She paused in organizing her portfolio, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "No, I suppose I'm not." There was something in the air between us, a tension that felt both exciting and slightly dangerous. I found myself studying the lines around her eyes, the way she moved her hands when she talked, the subtle confidence that came from someone who'd figured out who they were. "You know," I said, feeling bold, "you look amazing for someone who probably has me beat by a few years." It was meant as a compliment, though looking back, I realized how clumsy it sounded. Victoria raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "A few years?" she said. "How old do you think I am?" I felt heat creep up my neck. This was dangerous territory, the kind of question that had no good answer. "I don't know, maybe 35? 40? She laughed, a sound that was genuinely amused rather than offended. "You're sweet, and terrible at guessing ages." "Okay, I'll bite. How old are you?" 53. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. She looked like she could be my older sister, not old enough to be my mother. "Seriously?" "Seriously. Good genes, expensive skincare, and careful lighting." She was clearly enjoying my surprise. "Does that change things?" The question hung in the air between us. Did it change things? I looked at her again. This woman who'd spent the morning making me laugh, who'd shown genuine interest in my work, who carried herself with a sophistication I'd never encountered in people my own age. "Age is just a number," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Victoria's smile widened, and she leaned back in her chair with the expression of someone who'd just been dealt a winning hand. "Good," she said, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "Because I'm 53 and very interested in you." The words hit me like a physical force, not just the age revelation, but the directness of her interest. Women my age played games, sent mixed signals, kept you guessing about their intentions. Victoria had just laid her cards on the table with the kind of honesty that was both thrilling and terrifying. I started, then realized I had no idea what to say next. "You don't have to say anything right now," she said, standing and slinging her bag over her shoulder. "But I'm having dinner at Le Pigeon tomorrow night at 7. Table for 2, just in case you decide you meant what you said about numbers." She was halfway to the door before I found my voice. "Victoria." She turned back, eyebrows raised expectantly. "How do I know you're not just playing with me?" Her expression softened slightly. "You don't. But I haven't played games in 20 years, Marcus. I'm too old and too tired for anything that isn't real." And then she was gone, leaving me sitting in a coffee shop with a cold cup and a head full of questions I'd never thought to ask myself. The logical part of my brain was already composing reasons why this was a terrible idea. The age difference, the different life stages, the inevitable complications that came with getting involved with someone who had decades more experience than I did. But there was another part of me, a part I didn't recognize, that was already imagining what it would be like to sit across from Victoria at a candlelit restaurant table, to have that attention focused entirely on me, to explore whatever this unexpected attraction was leading toward. I sat there for another hour, staring at my laptop screen without seeing it, replaying every moment of our conversation. The way she'd listened when I talked about my work, the pride in her voice when she mentioned her daughter, the confidence with which she'd made her interest known. 53. The number kept rolling around in my head, not because it bothered me, but because it didn't. When I tried to picture Victoria, age wasn't what came to mind. It was intelligence, humor, the kind of self-possession that only came with experience. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate Jake asking if I wanted to grab drinks that night. I started to type yes, then stopped. Jake was 26, recently graduated, and still thought the height of sophistication was buying beer that didn't come in a case. The idea of explaining my morning to him, of trying to articulate why I was considering having dinner with a woman 25 years older than me, felt impossible. Instead, I packed up my laptop and walked home through the Pearl District, past couples my own age holding hands and groups of young professionals debating where to get lunch. For the first time, the world I'd been comfortable in felt somehow smaller, less interesting than the possibility Victoria had presented. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, I found myself Googling things I'd never thought to research before. Age, gap relationships, dating older women, the psychology of attraction across generations. Most of what I found was either clinical research or sensationalized articles, neither of which captured what I'd felt sitting across from Victoria that morning. What I kept coming back to was the conversation itself, not the age difference, not the social implications, but the simple fact that I'd enjoyed talking to her more than I'd enjoyed talking to anyone in months. She'd challenged me, made me think, treated me like an equal rather than a younger guy. She was humoring. By the time I went to bed, I still hadn't decided what I was going to do about dinner. But I knew I couldn't stop thinking about the way Victoria had smiled when she said she was interested in me. Like she was letting me in on a secret that could change everything. The next day dragged by with the slow inevitability of watching paint dry. I tried throwing myself into work, but every logo sketch looked like garbage, and I kept checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. Victoria hadn't given me her number, which meant I couldn't text her even if I'd figured out what to say by noon. I'd redesigned the same bakery logo 17 times and consumed enough coffee to power a small aircraft. My hands were shaking, though whether from caffeine or nerves was anyone's guess. Jake found me pacing around our apartment like a caged animal. "Dude, you're freaking me out," he said, dropping his gym bag by the door. "What's your deal today? How do you explain to your 26-year-old roommate that you're considering having dinner with a woman old enough to have been your high school teacher?" "Just work stress," I mumbled. "Right." Jake grabbed a protein shake from the fridge, studying me with the kind of concern usually reserved for people talking to invisible friends. "When's the last time you left this apartment?" "Yesterday. I went to grind. To work. That doesn't count." He chugged half his shake in one gulp. "Come out with us tonight. Sarah's bringing her friend from yoga class. Apparently she's into graphic design." The thought of spending an evening making small talk with another 20-something about font choices and social media strategies made me want to crawl under my desk. "I might have plans." "Might have plans?" Jake's eyebrows shot up. "Since when? Do you have mysterious evening plans?" "Since yesterday, when a woman named Victoria turned my understanding of attraction upside down." But I couldn't say that, so I shrugged and pretended to focus on my laptop screen. The afternoon crawled by with the enthusiasm of a DMV line. I found myself doing increasingly ridiculous things to pass time. I reorganized my digital files. I updated my LinkedIn profile. I even started researching Le Pigeon's menu, as if knowing they served duck confit would somehow prepare me for whatever conversation awaited. At 5:30, I stood in front of my closet like it held the secrets of the universe. Everything I owned suddenly looked either too young or too shabby. The flannel shirts that had seemed perfectly fine yesterday now looked like I'd raided a teenager's closet. My one decent button-down had a coffee stain near the collar that I'd somehow never noticed before. I settled on dark jeans and a navy sweater that Jake had convinced me to buy months ago, claiming it made me look less like a starving artist. In front of the bathroom mirror, I tried to see myself through Victoria's eyes. Did I look like someone worth her interest, or like a kid playing dress-up? The restaurant was only a 15-minute walk from my apartment, which gave me 14 minutes and 30 seconds too long to second-guess everything. Portland's evening crowd was out in force. Couples heading to dinner, groups of friends bar-hopping, the usual mix of urban sophistication and Pacific Northwest casual that made the city feel both cosmopolitan and approachable. Le Pigeon sat, tucked into a narrow space on East Burnside, the kind of place that looked unassuming from the outside, but probably charged more for an appetizer than I usually spent on groceries. Through the windows, I could see intimate tables lit by candles, servers moving with practiced precision, the soft glow of a restaurant that took itself seriously. I paused outside, watching the scene through the glass. This wasn't my world. I was more comfortable at food trucks and dive bars, places where you didn't need to know which fork to use first. The thought of sitting across from Victoria in this sophisticated environment, trying to match her poise, while navigating French menu items made my palms sweat. My phone showed 6:58, 2 minutes early, which seemed right. Not desperately punctual, not fashionably late. I took a deep breath and pushed through the door. The hostess, a woman with perfect posture and an expression that suggested she could spot tourists from orbit, looked up with practiced hospitality. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting someone." "Victoria." I realized I didn't know her last name. "Table for 2 at 7? Her expression shifted slightly, recognition dawning. "Ah, yes, Ms. Whitmore is already seated. Right this way. Whitmore. Victoria Whitmore." Even her name sounded more sophisticated than mine. She led me through the restaurant, past tables of well-dressed diners engaged in conversations that probably involved wine pairings and stock portfolios. At a corner table, Victoria sat studying the menu, looking perfectly at home in the elegant atmosphere. She'd changed from her coffee shop attire into a black dress that managed to be both professional and alluring. Her hair was down now, falling in soft waves past her shoulders, and she wore subtle jewelry that caught the candlelight. When she looked up and smiled, I felt that same jolt of attraction from the day before, only stronger. "You came," she said, standing to greet me with a kiss on the cheek that left me momentarily speechless. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might reconsider." She gestured for me to sit. 24 hours is plenty of time for second thoughts. The server appeared, almost immediately, as if he'd been hovering nearby, waiting for my arrival. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Victoria was already holding a glass of red wine that looked like it cost more than my monthly Netflix subscription. "I'll have whatever she's having," I said, then immediately worried I'd sounded presumptuous. "The Côte du Rhône," the server said with approval. "Excellent choice." When he left, Victoria raised her glass slightly. "Two unexpected encounters." I lifted my water glass, since my wine hadn't arrived yet. "To take chances. Is that what this is for you?" Taking a chance? The directness of her question caught me off guard, though I was beginning to realize that direct questions were simply how Victoria operated. "Honestly, yes. This isn't exactly my usual Tuesday night." "What's your usual Tuesday night?" "Netflix. And leftover pizza. Maybe some freelance work if I'm feeling ambitious." I paused as the server returned with my wine. "What about you?" "Books and early bedtime. Occasionally a glass of wine on the patio if the weather's nice." She took a sip of her wine, studying me over the rim. "We're both creatures of habit, it seems." "Then what are we doing here?" Victoria set down her glass and leaned forward slightly. "That's an excellent question. What do you think we're doing here?" Before I could answer, she continued. "Yesterday, I walked into that coffee shop planning to review some blueprints and answer emails. I had no intention of spending 3 hours talking to a stranger, much less inviting him to dinner." "So why did you?" "Because talking to you was the most interesting part of my day. Maybe my week." She picked up her menu, but her eyes stayed on me. "And because I'm 53 years old, Marcus, I've spent enough time playing it safe." The weight of her words settled between us. This wasn't casual dating or seeing where things went. This was a woman who'd made a deliberate choice to pursue something that interested her, regardless of conventional expectations. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why me? I mean, you could probably have dinner with anyone you wanted." Victoria smiled, the kind of expression that suggested she'd been expecting this question. "You really want to know?" I nodded. "Because you listened when I talked about my work. Because you showed me your designs without being asked. Because when I mentioned my daughter, you didn't immediately ask if I was married or divorced or what happened to her father." She paused to take another sip of wine. "And because when you looked at me, you saw me. Not my age, not whatever assumptions you might have had, just me." The server returned to take our orders, giving me a moment to process what she'd said. Victoria ordered the duck with the confidence of someone familiar with French cuisine. I went with the salmon, figuring it was hard to mess up fish. "Your turn," Victoria said when we were alone again. "Why are you here?" I considered giving her the safe answer. Something about being attracted to confidence or finding older women interesting. But Victoria had been honest with me, and she deserved the same in return. "Because I've never met anyone like you," I said finally. "Most people my age are still figuring out who they are. You already know. You say what you mean, you know what you want, and you're not afraid to go after it. That's—" I searched for the right word. "Intoxicating." Intoxicating. She seemed to taste the word. I like that better than mature or experienced. Those make me sound like aged cheese. I laughed, some of the tension leaving my shoulders. "Well, aged cheese can be pretty valuable." True. Some of the best things get better with time. The food arrived, and we fell into the kind of conversation that happens when two people are genuinely curious about each other. Victoria told me about growing up in Sacramento, the daughter of a contractor who taught her to appreciate good craftsmanship. I shared stories about small-town Idaho, where everyone knew everyone and anonymity was impossible. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Small-town life?" "Sometimes. There's something to be said for knowing your neighbors, for having roots somewhere." I cut into my salmon, which was perfectly prepared. "But I also like being able to disappear into a crowd when I want to." "And do you want to disappear?" The question had layers I wasn't sure I was ready to explore. "Not tonight," Victoria smiled. Good answer. The dinner conversation flowed like expensive wine, smooth, complex, and leaving me slightly intoxicated. Victoria had a way of asking questions that made me think harder about my own answers. When I mentioned wanting to start my own design firm someday, she didn't just nod politely. She wanted to know about my business plan, my target market, the specific challenges I anticipated. "Most people just say that's cool when I talk about freelancing," I admitted, finishing the last of my salmon. "Most people your age haven't run a business," Victoria replied. "I started my landscape architecture firm when I was 32. Scariest and most rewarding thing I've ever done." "You own your own company?" 15 employees. Offices in Portland and Seattle. She said it matter-of-factly, without the pride or defensiveness I might have expected. "Started in my garage with a drafting table and more ambition than sense." I tried to picture a 32-year-old Victoria, probably with a toddler at home, trying to build a business from scratch. The image was both inspiring and intimidating. "What made you take the leap?" Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. "Divorce papers and a stack of bills. Sometimes life makes decisions for you." She caught my look of surprise. "That bothers you? That I was married?" "No, it's just—" I struggled to articulate what I was feeling. "I keep realizing how much life you've lived that I haven't even thought about yet." "Does that intimidate you?" The honest answer was yes, but not in the way she probably expected. "It makes me wonder what I have to offer someone who's already accomplished so much." Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying me with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably. "You want to know what you have to offer?" I nodded. "Curiosity, enthusiasm, the ability to see things with fresh eyes." She paused as the server refilled our wine glasses. "Do you know what most men my age talk about on dates?" I'm guessing it's not graphic design, golf handicaps, stock portfolios, their ex-wives' spending habits, their children's college expenses. Victoria's tone was dry. "You asked me about my work like it actually mattered to you." When I showed you those landscape drawings, you wanted to understand the creative process, not just how much money I make doing it. The server appeared with dessert menus, but Victoria waved him away. Just coffee for me. Same, I said, though I was beginning to feel like I'd consumed enough stimulants for one day. Can I tell you something? Victoria said once we were alone. Again. Of course. I almost didn't come tonight. That caught me off guard. She'd seemed so confident, so certain about what she wanted. Why? Because I've been on enough dates to know how this usually goes. The initial attraction, the discovery of the age difference, then the awkward conversation about where this is heading and what people will think. She stirred cream into her coffee with deliberate precision. I didn't want to put either of us through that again. Again? Victoria smiled ruefully. You're not the first younger man I've been interested in, Marcus, though you might be the first one worth the potential complications. The coffee arrived, giving me a moment to process this revelation. Victoria had dated younger men before. This wasn't some midlife crisis or spontaneous adventure. It was a pattern, a preference she'd already explored. How much younger? I asked, then immediately regretted the question. Sorry, that's none of my business. It's a fair question. The last one was 35, an architect I met through work. Victoria's tone was neutral, but I sensed there was more to the story. Lasted about 8 months before he decided he wanted someone who could give him children. The words hit me like cold water. Children. It was such an obvious consideration that I felt stupid for not thinking about it sooner. Victoria was 53. That ship had probably sailed long ago. Is that something you think about? She asked, apparently reading my expression. Having kids? Honestly, no. Not really. I mean, maybe someday, but it's not something I've planned out. I took a sip of coffee, buying time to organize my thoughts. Is it something you wanted? More children, I mean? I had my daughter when I was 28, single mother from day one. Victoria's voice carried no self-pity, just matter-of-fact acceptance. I've done the sleepless nights, the soccer practices, the teenage drama. I love being a mother, but I'm not looking to do it again. The conversation had taken a serious turn, moving from flirtation into territory that felt more like relationship, negotiations. Part of me wanted to lighten the mood, to steer us back to safer ground. But another part, the part that was increasingly fascinated by Victoria's directness, wanted to lean into the discomfort. What are you looking for? I asked. Victoria considered the question while I tried to read her expression in the candlelight. The restaurant had filled up around us, but somehow our corner table felt isolated from the surrounding conversations. Companionship. Someone who challenges me intellectually. Good conversation over good wine. Someone who understands that I have a life and a career and a daughter, and that those aren't obstacles to work around. She met my eyes directly. And physical chemistry, obviously. Life's too short for relationships without passion. The word passion hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. I felt heat creep up my neck, though whether from the wine or the direction of the conversation, I couldn't tell. What about you? Victoria continued. What are you looking for? It was my turn to consider the question, and I realized I'd never really thought about it in concrete terms. Most of my dating experience had been casual, focused more on immediate attraction than long-term compatibility. I guess I'm looking for someone who makes me want to be better than I am, I said finally. Someone who sees potential in me that I might not see in myself. And do you think I see that potential? The question was direct, vintage Victoria. No dancing around the subject or leaving things open to interpretation. I hope so, but I'm not sure why you would. Victoria reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was soft, her touch confident. Because in the space of 2 conversations, you've made me laugh more than I have in months. Because you look at my work and see art, not just a way to make money. Because you're here, having this conversation, instead of running away from something that doesn't fit into a neat category. Her hand was still covering mine, and I found myself studying the contrast. Her manicured nails against my slightly ink-stained fingers, The subtle lines that spoke of decades I hadn't lived yet. The warmth that made me want to turn my palm up and intertwine our fingers. "Victoria," I started, then realized I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "Yes?" "I'm scared I'm going to disappoint you." She smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "Marcus, I'm 53 years old. I've been disappointed by experts. You're not going to break me." The server returned with the check, and Victoria reached for her purse before I could react. "My invitation, my treat. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She handed the server her credit card without looking at the total. "Besides, I probably make more money than you do." It was a statement of fact, not a judgment. But it still stung slightly. Another reminder of the differences between us, the gap in life experience and financial stability that felt both insignificant and enormous, depending on the moment. We walked out of the restaurant into the cool Portland evening. The street was busy with people moving between bars and restaurants, the kind of urban energy that made the city feel alive after dark. Victoria had brought a light jacket, which she pulled around her shoulders as we stepped onto the sidewalk. "Thank you for dinner," I said, suddenly uncertain about the protocol. How did these evenings end? A handshake seemed ridiculous, but a kiss felt presumptuous. "Thank you for coming, for taking the chance." Victoria stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume again. "I'd like to see you again, Marcus." "I'd like that too." She reached up and kissed my cheek, letting her lips linger for just a moment longer than casual friendship would require. "I'll call you tomorrow." "You don't have my number." Victoria smiled, pulling out her phone. "I have my ways. What's your last name?" "Bennett." "Marcus Bennett." "Marcus Bennett." She typed something into her phone. "There. Now you're in my contacts." She turned to go, then looked back over her shoulder. "Sweet dreams, Marcus." I watched her walk to her car, a sleek BMW that suited her perfectly. She drove away with the same confidence she did everything else, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the taste of her perfume in the air and a head full of questions about what happened next. I walked home through the Pearl District in a daze, replaying every moment of the evening. The way Victoria had touched my hand across the table, her laugh when I'd made some stupid joke about the wine pairing, the confidence with which she'd handled the check, as natural as breathing. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, emotionally exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Jake was sprawled on the couch playing video games, surrounded by empty beer bottles and the remnants of what looked like 3 different takeout orders. He glanced up when I walked in, taking in my outfit with raised eyebrows. "Well, well, look who's all dressed up. How'd the mysterious evening plans go?" I kicked off my shoes and collapsed into the armchair across from him. "It was, complicated." "Good. Complicated? Or bad complicated?" "I honestly don't know yet." Jake paused his game, sensing this was more serious than my usual dating disasters. "You want to talk about it?" The last thing I wanted was to explain Victoria to my roommate, who thought sophistication meant drinking craft beer instead of Budweiser. But I needed to process what had happened, and Jake was the only option available. "I had dinner with an older woman." "How much older? Like 30? 53. Jake's controller clattered to the floor. "Dude, 53? That's old enough to be your mom. Thanks for the math lesson." "I'm serious, man. What are you thinking? Is this some kind of Mrs. Robinson fantasy?" I bristled at the reference, though I couldn't entirely blame him for making it. "It's not like that. God, how do I even explain this? She's smart, successful, and interesting. We have actual conversations about things that matter." "Okay, but 53, Marcus. What do you guys even have in common?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself all evening. "More than you'd think. She gets my work in a way most people don't. She's built her own business from nothing. She doesn't play games or send mixed signals." Jake retrieved his controller, shaking his head. "And you think this is going somewhere? Like, what's the endgame here?" "I don't know. Maybe there doesn't have to be an endgame." "There's always an endgame, dude. What happens when she wants to introduce you to her friends? Or her family? Are you ready to be the boy toy at dinner parties?" The phrase boy toy hit me like a slap. Was that what I was? Some kind of midlife crisis accessory for a successful, older woman? The thought made my stomach turn, but I couldn't entirely dismiss it. It's not like that, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Look, I'm not judging. If you want to have some fun with a cougar, go for it. Just don't fool yourself into thinking it's something more than what it is. I went to bed that night with Jake's words echoing in my head. Cougar, boy toy. The crude terms felt like they reduced everything I'd felt during dinner to some kind of stereotype. But wasn't that exactly what people would think? What would her friends assume when they met me? The next morning brought a text from Victoria at exactly 9 o'clock. Good morning. I hope you slept well. Would you like to have coffee this afternoon? Same place as yesterday? I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. Yes. What time? 3 o'clock. I'll be the one trying not to monopolize the good table. Despite everything Jake had said, despite my own doubts, I found myself smiling at the phone. Victoria's humor, even in text form, had a way of cutting through my anxiety. I spent the morning working on client projects, grateful for the distraction. But by 2:30, I was back at Grind Coffee, nursing my usual order and trying to look casual. Victoria arrived exactly on time, carrying the same leather portfolio but dressed more casually in jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her look younger somehow. You beat me here, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. May have been a little eager. Good. Eager is better than indifferent. She signaled the barista for her usual order. How are you feeling about last night? The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised me anymore, but it still caught me off guard. Honestly? Confused. But in a good way, I think. Confused. About what specifically? I took a breath, deciding to match her honesty. About what this is. About what people will think. About whether I'm just some kind of novelty for you. Victoria's expression grew serious. Novelty? You know? Younger guy, different perspective, something to shake up the routine. The words felt ugly coming out of my mouth, but I needed to voice the fear. Is that what you think you are to me? I don't know what to think. My roommate seems to think I'm your boy toy. Victoria's eyebrows shot up. Boy toy? That's charming. And what do you think? I think I don't know enough about any of this to have an opinion. Her coffee arrived, giving us both a moment to regroup. Victoria stirred in cream with the same deliberate precision I'd noticed the night before, and I found myself watching her hands again, looking for clues about what she was thinking. Marcus, can I tell you something about being a 53-year-old woman dating in Portland? I nodded. Most men my age are either bitter about their divorces, obsessed with their careers, or looking for a replacement mother for their children. They want someone to cook their meals and organize their social lives and never challenge them about anything important. She took a sip of coffee. The few who are interesting enough to hold my attention usually run the other direction the moment they realize I'm not going to be anyone's supporting character. And younger men? Younger men usually fall into two categories. The ones who fetishize older women, the whole experienced woman teaching the innocent boy fantasy, and the ones who are looking for someone to take care of them financially while they figure their lives out. I felt heat creep up my neck. Which category do you think I'm in? Neither. That's why I'm here having coffee with you instead of blocking your number. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by curiosity. What makes you so sure? Because last night, you were nervous about the expensive restaurant. Because you offered to pay, even though you probably couldn't afford it. Because you asked about my work, my daughter, my business, without once asking about my divorce settlement or my financial situation. Victoria leaned forward slightly. And because when I touched your hand, you looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the room, not like I was some conquest to brag about later. The memory of her hand covering mine sent a jolt through my chest. You are the most fascinating woman in the room. In most rooms, probably. Victoria smiled, the kind of expression that made me understand why men wrote poetry. See? That's exactly what I mean. You make me feel seen, Marcus. Not categorized or analyzed or reduced to some demographic. Just seen. Is that rare? Rarer than you might think. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. I have a client meeting in an hour, but I want to ask you something first. Okay. This Saturday, I'm attending a gallery opening downtown. Local artist, someone whose work I've collected for years. It's not a big event, maybe 30 people, but the crowd will be... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Let's say they'll be mostly my age and older. Art collectors, other business owners, people I've known for years. I could see where this was going, and my stomach clenched. You're asking me to go with you. I'm asking if you'd be comfortable going with me. There's a difference. What would you tell people? About us, I mean. The truth. That you're someone I'm seeing, someone I enjoy spending time with. Victoria's tone was matter-of-fact, but I could see the question in her eyes. Unless you'd prefer I introduce you as my nephew, or something equally ridiculous. The idea of being Victoria's date at an art gallery opening, surrounded by her professional and social circle, terrified me. But it also thrilled me in a way I couldn't quite explain. What kind of art? I asked. Contemporary landscapes. Some abstract pieces. The kind of thing you'd probably have interesting opinions about, given your design background. You really want me there? I really want you there, but only if you want to be there. I'm not interested in dragging reluctant dates to social events. I studied her face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of test or setup. But Victoria's expression was open, genuine, waiting for my answer without pressure or manipulation. What time should I pick you up? Her smile could have powered the entire coffee shop. I'll pick you up. 7 o'clock. And Marcus? Yeah? Wear something nice, but not too nice. These people can smell desperation from across the room. The rest of the week passed in a blur of overthinking and wardrobe anxiety. I found myself researching contemporary art movements at 2 in the morning, trying to cram years of cultural education into a few Wikipedia articles. What was the difference between abstract expressionism and neo-expressionism? Should I have opinions about brushwork? Was it pretentious to mention color theory, or would I sound like an amateur if I didn't? Friday morning brought another crisis. What exactly constituted nice but not too nice for an art gallery opening? I'd assumed my wardrobe was reasonably sophisticated until I started imagining myself next to Victoria in a room full of art collectors. Every shirt looked either too casual or too formal, too young or too trying hard. In desperation, I called my sister Emma in Seattle. She was 31, worked in marketing, and had the kind of social confidence I'd always envied. You're overthinking this, she said after I'd explained my dilemma. What kind of clothes does she wear? Professional. Elegant. Like she stepped out of a magazine but doesn't try too hard about it. Okay, so she has actual style. That's good. Means she won't be embarrassed if you don't look like you're playing dress-up. Emma's tone turned thoughtful. Do you have that dark gray blazer Mom bought you for graduation? Yeah, but isn't that too formal? Not with dark jeans and a white button-down? No tie. Roll the sleeves up slightly. It says you made an effort without looking like you're trying to be someone you're not. You think that'll work? Marcus. Honey, if this woman is as sophisticated as you say, she already knows you're not some wealthy art collector. She invited you anyway. Just be yourself, but the version of yourself that respects the occasion. Emma's advice helped, but it didn't address the deeper anxiety gnawing at me. This wasn't just about clothes or conversation topics. This was about stepping into Victoria's world, meeting her people, being scrutinized by a crowd that would immediately recognize me as the outsider I was. Saturday evening arrived with Portland's typical spring drizzle, the kind of soft rain that made everything look moody and cinematic. I'd spent an hour getting ready, following Emma's advice about the blazer and adding a pair of leather shoes that Jake had left behind after moving out of his previous apartment. Looking in the mirror, I had to admit I looked reasonably put together. Not like I belonged at an art gallery opening necessarily, but like someone who might plausibly be dating a successful landscape architect. Victoria arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, driving a different car this time, a sleek Audi that looked like it cost more than I'd made in the past 2 years. Through the window, I could see her checking her lipstick in the rearview mirror, a small gesture that made her seem momentarily vulnerable and somehow more human. She looked stunning. Her dress was midnight blue, with clean lines that showed off her figure without being obvious about it. Her jewelry was minimal but expensive looking, and her hair was swept up in a way that revealed the elegant line of her neck. When she smiled at me through the windshield, I felt that familiar jolt of attraction mixed with intimidation. "You look perfect," she said as I got into the passenger seat. "Emma gave good advice, I'm assuming?" "You know about Emma? You mentioned calling your sister for a fashion consultation. It seemed like a reasonable guess." Victoria pulled away from the curb with the smooth confidence of someone who'd been driving luxury cars for years. Sisters usually have better taste than brothers when it comes to these things. The gallery was in the Pearl District, housed in a converted warehouse that had been transformed into the kind of space that screamed expensive taste. Large windows, exposed brick, polished concrete floors. Through the glass front, I could see clusters of well-dressed people holding wine glasses and speaking in the hushed tones reserved for cultural events. "Last chance to back out," Victoria said, pulling into a parking space across the street. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" "I'm trying to make sure you're here because you want to be, not because you feel obligated." I studied her profile in the dashboard light. There was something different about her tonight, a tension I hadn't seen before. "Are you nervous?" Victoria turned to look at me, surprise flickering across her features. "A little. Is that strange?" "Why would you be nervous? These are your people." "Exactly, these are my people. Which means they'll have opinions about you, about us, about what it means that I'm bringing someone 25 years younger to a social event." She adjusted her rear-view mirror unnecessarily. "I care about what some of these people think. Marcus. Their friends, clients, professional contacts. Their opinions matter to my business." The admission caught me off guard. Victoria had seemed so confident about everything up to this point, so certain that age was just a number and other people's opinions were irrelevant. Seeing her vulnerable made her more real somehow, but it also made the stakes feel higher. "We could leave," I said. "Go get dinner somewhere else. No one would have to know." Victoria smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "No, I want to be here with you. I just needed to acknowledge that it feels like a big step." "It is a big step." "Yes, it is." We sat in the car for another moment, rain pattering softly against the windshield. Through the gallery windows, I could see people examining paintings, their expressions serious and contemplative. It looked like a foreign country to me, a world where people spent thousands of dollars on wall decorations and had opinions about artistic movements. Victoria? Yes? What if they hate me? She turned, in her seat, to face me fully. "They won't hate you. They might be surprised, confused, maybe even a little judgmental. But they won't hate you. How can you be sure? Because you're not hateable, Marcus. You're intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in other people. Those qualities transcend age demographics." She checked her lipstick in the mirror one more time. "And if anyone is rude to you, we'll leave immediately." "Promise?" "Promise." The gallery was warm and buzzing with conversation when we walked in. The crowd was exactly what I'd expected. Mostly people in their 40s and 50s, dressed in the kind of understated elegance that suggested substantial bank accounts. The artwork lined the walls in careful arrangements, landscapes that seemed to shift between realistic and abstract depending on how you looked at them. A server immediately appeared with a tray of wine glasses. Victoria selected a white wine, while I opted for red, figuring it would give me something to do with my hands. The first sip was excellent, which somehow made me more nervous. Even the wine was sophisticated here. "Victoria. Darling, you made it." A woman approached us with the kind of air-kiss enthusiasm that suggested long friendship. She was probably Victoria's age, with silver hair styled in an expensive cut and jewelry that caught the gallery lighting. Her eyes immediately moved to me with undisguised curiosity. "Sarah, this is Marcus Bennett," Victoria said smoothly. "Marcus, this is Sarah Chen. She owns 3 of David's pieces already and has been trying to convince me to buy one for years." "Finally succeeding, I hope," Sarah said, extending a manicured hand. "Lovely to meet you, Marcus. Are you in the art world?" "Graphic design," I replied, accepting her handshake. "Different kinds of art, but I appreciate the visual elements." "Oh, how interesting. Commercial work?" "Mostly branding and marketing materials, some web design." I could feel her evaluating me. trying to place me in whatever social hierarchy governed this crowd. Marcus has excellent taste, Victoria interjected. He helped me rethink the color palette for the Henderson Project. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. The Henderson Project, apparently, meant something to her. Really? I would never have thought to use earth tones in that space. It was inspired. I had no idea what the Henderson Project was, but Victoria's subtle endorsement seemed to raise my stock with Sarah. We chatted for a few more minutes about design trends and the intersection of commercial and fine art before Sarah excused herself to greet other arrivals. Smooth, Victoria murmured as Sarah moved away. What's the Henderson Project? A commercial landscape job I did last year. Very high-profile client. Victoria steered me toward a particularly striking painting, one that seemed to capture the Oregon coast in brushstrokes that suggested rather than defined. You handled that well. She was testing me. Of course she was. That's what people do at these things. They probe until they figure out where you fit. And where do I fit? Victoria studied the painting, her expression thoughtful. That remains to be seen. We moved through the gallery at a leisurely pace, stopping to examine pieces that caught our attention. Victoria had an easy familiarity with the artistic terminology, discussing composition and technique with the kind of fluency that came from years of exposure. I found myself listening more than speaking, absorbing the way she analyzed the work. What do you think of this one? She asked, stopping in front of an abstract piece that looked like a storm rendered in blues and grays. I studied it for a moment, trying to see beyond the initial visual impact. It's angry, but not destructively angry. More like frustrated potential, like energy that doesn't know where to go. Victoria looked at me with surprise. That's a remarkably perceptive reading. You sound shocked. Not shocked, impressed. Most people look at abstract work and either dismiss it or try to find literal imagery that isn't there. You're reading the emotional content. A man approached us from across the room, and I could see Victoria's posture shift slightly. He was probably in his early 60s, distinguished in the way that came from good genes and expensive grooming. His suit was clearly custom-made, and he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Victoria, he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek with familiar ease. Beautiful as always. Robert, Victoria replied, and I caught something in her tone I couldn't quite identify. I'd like you to meet Marcus Bennett. Marcus, this is Robert Hamilton. He's one of Portland's most successful real estate developers. Robert's handshake was firm to the point of being aggressive, his eyes assessing me with the kind of calculation I associated with job interviews. Marcus, what brings you to David's opening? Victoria invited me. I'm interested in contemporary art. Ah, are you a collector? The question was clearly loaded. Robert knew exactly what kind of income was required for serious art collecting, and he was fishing to determine my financial status. I appreciate art more than I can afford it, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Honest answer. I respect that. Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. And how do you and Victoria know each other? We met at a coffee shop, Victoria said before I could answer. Marcus is a graphic designer. Freelance or with a firm? Freelance, I replied, beginning to feel like I was being interrogated. Brave choice. Feast or famine lifestyle, I imagine. Robert's tone was condescending, the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head. Still, it must be nice to have that kind of creative freedom. It has its advantages, I said, working to keep the edge out of my voice. Robert, Victoria interjected smoothly, didn't you recently commission that sculpture for the lobby of the Morrison Building? I'd love to hear about the selection process. She'd expertly redirected the conversation away from my career and financial status, but the damage was done. Robert had made his point clear. I didn't belong here, didn't have the resources or connections to move in this circle. The rest of our conversation was polite but strained, and I was relieved when he excused himself to speak with the gallery owner. Sorry about that, Victoria said once we were alone again. Robert can be intense. Is he always that charming with your dates? Victoria's expression grew carefully neutral. Robert and I have history. We dated briefly about 2 years ago. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Robert wasn't just some social contact making conversation. He was an ex-boyfriend, sizing up the competition. Suddenly, his questions about my career and finances made perfect sense. He'd been establishing dominance, marking territory in the way successful men did when they encountered perceived threats. Dated. How briefly? A few months. It didn't work out. Victoria's tone suggested the topic was closed, but I couldn't let it go. Why not? Because he's exactly the kind of man I was telling you about. Successful, established, and completely convinced that women exist to enhance his image and organize his social calendar. She took a sip of wine, her movements precise and controlled. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't rearrange my business trips to accommodate his dinner parties. I tried to picture Victoria with Robert, the two of them at events like this one, and found the image both plausible and disturbing. They made sense together in a way that Victoria and I didn't. Similar ages, similar backgrounds, similar social circles. Whatever had gone wrong between them probably had nothing to do with compatibility, and everything to do with Robert's expectations about women's roles. He's still interested, I said. Yes, he is. Does that bother you? Victoria turned to look at me directly. Does it bother you? I don't know. Should it? That depends on whether you trust me or not. The question hung between us, loaded with implications. Did I trust Victoria? I'd known her for less than a week, had been on exactly one date, and was now standing in a room where I clearly didn't belong while her wealthy ex-boyfriend circled like a shark. Trust seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. But looking at her face, seeing the genuine question in her eyes, I realized that trust wasn't about logic, or duration, or circumstances. It was about the feeling in my gut when she smiled. The way she defended me to Robert without making it obvious. The honesty with which she'd approached everything from our age difference to her nervousness about tonight. Yes, I said. I trust you. Victoria's smile was worth every moment of discomfort I'd felt since walking into the gallery. Good, because I trust you too. The rest of the evening passed more smoothly. We looked at art, talked with other attendees, and gradually I began to relax into the rhythm of gallery conversation. Victoria introduced me to several more people, and while I could sense their curiosity about our relationship, no one else was as openly aggressive as Robert had been. By 9 o'clock, the crowd was beginning to thin out. Victoria had purchased one of the smaller landscapes, a piece that captured the moody beauty of the Oregon coastline, in ways that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with the Pacific Northwest in the first place. Ready to go? She asked after completing the purchase. More than ready. We walked to her car through the gentle rain, both of us quiet with the exhaustion that came from sustained social performance. It wasn't until we were sitting in the parking space across from the gallery that either of us spoke. So, Victoria said, turning in her seat to face me. Verdict? On what? The evening. My people. Whether you can handle being seen with me in public. I considered the question seriously. The evening had been challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. The subtle class distinctions, the careful social positioning, the way conversations carried multiple layers of meaning. It was like learning to navigate a foreign culture. But it had also been enlightening. I'd seen Victoria in her element, watched her move through her social world with grace and confidence, and understood something new about who she was outside of our private conversations. I can handle it, I said finally. But I'm going to need some coaching on art terminology. Victoria laughed, the sound filling the car with warmth. Deal. But Marcus? Yeah, you don't need to become someone else to fit into my world. You just need to be yourself with confidence. Even if I don't know a Monet from a Manet, especially then, authentic curiosity is more attractive than fake expertise. She started the car and pulled out into the quiet street. The gallery was still lit up behind us, the remaining guests visible through the windows like figures in a painting themselves. I watched it recede in the side mirror, feeling like I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. Victoria? Thank you for tonight, including me. Thank you for being brave enough to come. As we drove through the rain-slicked streets of Portland, I found myself thinking about the word brave. Was it brave to date someone 25? Years older, to step into a world where I clearly didn't belong? To risk the judgment of strangers and friends alike? Or was it just the natural consequence of being attracted to someone remarkable? Maybe the distinction didn't matter. Maybe courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about moving forward despite it. And as Victoria's hand found mine across the center console, her fingers warm and sure, I realized I was ready to find out exactly how brave I could be. The week following the gallery opening brought an unexpected shift in our dynamic. Victoria started texting me daily, not long conversations but small observations about her day, links to articles she thought I'd find interesting, photos of landscapes that caught her eye during site visits. It felt natural, like we'd been doing this for months instead of barely 2 weeks. On Wednesday morning, she sent me a picture of a coffee shop in Seattle with the message, "Reminded me of our first meeting. Wish you were here for the terrible small talk." I was in the middle of a logo redesign that was going nowhere fast, so I called her instead of texting back. "Missing Portland's superior coffee culture?" I asked when she picked up. "Missing Portland's superior company," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "This client wants me to recreate the gardens at Versailles in their backyard. I'm starting to think some people have more money than brain cells." Versailles? In Seattle? Doesn't that require, a different climate? Among other things, but they're willing to pay me an obscene amount of money to try, so I'm conducting a very serious consultation about the feasibility of importing French topiary artists. I laughed, leaning back in my desk chair. "How long are you up there?" "Until tomorrow afternoon." "Why do you miss me?" The question was playful, but there was something underneath it that sounded like genuine curiosity. Did I miss her? I'd been thinking about her more than I wanted to admit, checking my phone for her messages, wondering what she was doing during the quiet moments of my day. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with honesty. "I do." "Good." Because I was thinking, when I get back, maybe you could cook for me. I'd like to see your apartment, meet the famous Jake, and understand how you live when you're not being dragged to art galleries. The suggestion sent a jolt of panic through me. My apartment was a typical 20-something guy cave, mismatched furniture, empty pizza boxes, a bathroom that hadn't been properly cleaned since the lease signing. The thought of Victoria in that space, comparing it to whatever sophisticated living situation she undoubtedly had, made me want to crawl under my desk. "You really want to slum it with the peasants?" I asked, trying to make it sound like a joke. "Marcus." Her tone had shifted, becoming more serious. "If we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need to know who you are when you're not trying to impress me. And you need to stop assuming I'm looking down on you." "I don't think you're looking down on me. Don't you?" "Every time I mention money or success or my lifestyle, you get defensive. Every time someone questions what you're doing with me, you start wondering if you belong. When do you get to just be comfortable with who you are?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized she was right. I had been defensive, constantly measuring myself against some imaginary standard I thought she expected. But Victoria had never asked me to be anything other than myself. "Friday night," I said. "I'll cook. But I'm warning you, my kitchen skills are limited, and Jake might try to interrogate you about your intentions. I can handle Jake. What about your cooking?" "Pasta. I make excellent pasta." "Perfect. I'll bring wine." "Expensive wine?" "The best kind." Thursday dragged by with the enthusiasm of a funeral procession. I found myself cleaning my apartment with a thoroughness that would have impressed my mother, scrubbing surfaces that hadn't seen a sponge in months. Jake watched my frenzy with amusement and growing concern. "Dude, you're freaking out again," he said, lounging on the newly vacuumed couch. "It's just dinner." "It's not just dinner. She's coming here, to our place. She's gonna see how we actually live." "So?" "We live like normal people. Slightly messy normal people, but normal." I gestured around the apartment, which looked better than it had since we'd moved in, but still felt shabby compared to the environments I'd seen Victoria navigate. "Look at this place, Jake. Really look at it. The furniture is from garage sales and IKEA. There's a water stain on the ceiling that we've been ignoring for 6 months. The refrigerator makes that weird humming noise. And she probably lives in some perfectly decorated condo with original art on the walls and a kitchen that costs more than we pay in rent." Jake studied me with the expression he usually reserved for particularly difficult video game puzzles. Has she ever said anything that made you think she cares about that stuff? No, but has she ever acted like she's embarrassed to be seen with you? No. Has she given you any indication that she's judging your lifestyle or your apartment or anything else about how you live? I considered the question honestly. Victoria had been nothing but supportive, encouraging, and interested in my life as it actually was. The judgment I was so worried about seemed to exist entirely in my own head. No, I admitted. Then maybe stop borrowing trouble and just cook the woman some pasta. Friday evening arrived with typical Portland spring weather. Not quite raining, but threatening to at any moment. I'd spent the afternoon shopping for ingredients, determined to make something that would showcase the limited culinary skills I actually possessed. Fresh linguine, good parmesan, pancetta from the fancy Italian market downtown. If I was going to be judged on my cooking, at least the ingredients would be respectable. Victoria arrived at 7:30 carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my grocery budget for the month, and looking effortlessly elegant in jeans and a cashmere sweater. She kissed my cheek hello, and I caught that familiar hint of her perfume that always made my stomach flip. "This is lovely," she said, looking around the living room with genuine interest. "Very you. Very me," meaning what? Comfortable. Unpretentious. Like someone actually lives here instead of just using it for magazine photo shoots. Jake emerged from his bedroom on cue, clearly having heard her arrival. He'd made an effort to clean up his appearance, trading his usual gaming attire for actual pants and a shirt without visible stains. "You must be Victoria," he said, extending his hand with a politeness that surprised me. "I'm Jake, the infamous roommate." "Infamous?" Victoria shook his hand with a smile. "What terrible things has Marcus been saying about you? Probably that I survive on energy drinks and leftover Chinese food, leave dirty dishes in the sink, and have strong opinions about things that don't matter." "All true," I called from the kitchen, where I was attempting to look competent while boiling water. "At least he's honest," Victoria said. "I appreciate that in a roommate." They settled into easy conversation while I focused on not overcooking the pasta. Through the pass-through window, I could see Victoria asking Jake about his work, his hobbies, his thoughts on living in Portland. She had the same genuine curiosity about him that she'd shown me, treating him like a real person rather than an obstacle to navigate. "Marcus says you're a landscape architect," Jake was saying. "That must be cool, designing outdoor spaces." It has its moments. Though this week I've been trying to convince a client that recreating Versailles in Seattle might not be the best use of their money. Why not? What could go wrong with French gardens in the Pacific Northwest? Victoria laughed. "Where do I start? Wrong climate, wrong soil, wrong maintenance requirements. But they have enough money to ignore practical concerns." "Must be nice," Jake said, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, not the ignoring practical concerns part. The having enough money part. Money solves some problems and creates others," Victoria replied diplomatically. "Mostly it just gives you different things to worry about." I plated the pasta, grateful for the distraction of carrying dishes to the table. The conversation was going better than I'd hoped, but I could sense Jake's curiosity building toward the questions I'd been dreading. "So," Jake said as we settled around our small dining table, "not to be weird about it, but how does this work? You and Marcus, I mean." "Jake," I said in warning. "What? I'm curious. You're like successful and sophisticated and stuff. He's Marcus." "Thanks for the glowing endorsement," I muttered. Victoria took a sip of wine, considering her answer. "It works because we enjoy each other's company. We have good conversations, shared interests, and mutual respect. The usual foundation for any relationship. But the age thing doesn't make it complicated? Everything worthwhile is complicated. Jake, the question is whether the complications are worth dealing with. And they are?" Victoria looked at me across the table, and I felt that familiar flutter of attraction mixed with something deeper. "So far, yes. The pasta was actually decent, and the wine was exceptional." As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed naturally between the three of us. Jake shared stories about his job at a local tech startup. Victoria told us about some of her more challenging clients, and I found myself relaxing into the domestic normalcy of it all. "This is really good," Victoria said, twirling linguine around her fork with practiced ease. Where did you learn to cook? Desperation mostly. Jake's idea of cooking is microwaving frozen burritos, so it was either learn or starve. Hey, I can cook, Jake protested. I make excellent ramen. Ramen doesn't count as cooking, Victoria said with mock seriousness. That's just advanced rehydration. After dinner, Jake excused himself to meet friends at a bar, leaving Victoria and me alone with the dishes and the remainder of the wine. I started loading the dishwasher while she wandered around the living room, examining the few personal touches that distinguished our space from a generic rental. Is this your work? She asked, stopping in front of a framed poster I designed for a local music festival. Yeah. Pro bono project. But I liked how it turned out. She studied it carefully, and I found myself holding my breath waiting for her assessment. It's excellent. The typography is perfect for the aesthetic, and the color palette captures the whole vibe without being too literal. You sound surprised. Not surprised. Impressed. There's a difference. She moved to the window, looking out at the street below. I like your place, Marcus. It feels real. Real meaning cheap? Victoria turned from the window to face me. Real meaning lived in. Authentic. Like the people who live here actually have personalities and interests beyond impressing visitors. I finished with the dishes and joined her by the window. The street was quiet except for the occasional car passing through puddles of streetlight, the kind of peaceful urban evening that made me grateful to live in a city that still felt human-scaled. Can I ask you something? I said. Always. Where do you live? I realized I don't actually know anything about your living situation. Victoria smiled. I wondered when you'd get curious about that. I have a condo in the South Waterfront, 23rd floor, river views, all the urban sophistication you'd expect. Sounds intimidating. It's beautiful and functional and completely impersonal. I bought it because it made financial sense and impressed clients. But I've never felt at home there the way you clearly do here. The admission surprised me. Really. This place has character, history, the sense that life actually happens here. My condo feels like a hotel suite that I happen to sleep in. We stood by the window in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood settle into its evening rhythm. Having Victoria in my space felt both natural and surreal, like two different worlds had temporarily merged without creating the disaster I'd anticipated. Marcus? Yeah? Thank you for letting me see how you live, for trusting me with the real version of your life. Thank you for not running away when you saw my second-hand furniture and weird ceiling stain. The ceiling stain has character. It looks like a map of something. I looked up at the brown mark I'd been embarrassed about for months. What kind of map? Maybe Australia, or a very abstract interpretation of Lake Michigan. You're making fun of me. I'm making fun of your ceiling stain. There's a difference. Victoria moved closer to me, close enough that I could see the wine flush on her cheeks and the way her sweater brought out the green in her eyes. I had a lovely evening, Marcus. Your pasta, your apartment, your roommate interrogating my intentions, all of it. Jake wasn't that bad. Jake was perfect. Protective but not hostile. Curious but not intrusive. He clearly cares about you. He thinks I'm crazy for dating you. And what do you think? I considered the question, looking at Victoria standing in my living room, beautiful and sophisticated, and somehow completely at ease in my imperfect space. I think maybe being crazy isn't always a bad thing. She reached up and kissed me then, soft and wine-sweet and full of promise. It was our first real kiss, and it felt like a door opening to possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. Stay, I said when we broke apart. I thought you'd never ask. Later, as we lay in my narrow bed listening to the rain that had finally decided to commit to falling, Victoria traced patterns on my chest with her fingertip. What are you thinking about? She asked. How this doesn't feel as strange as I thought it would. What did you think it would feel like? I don't know. More awkward, maybe. Like I was playing a role I didn't understand. And instead it feels like the most natural thing in the world. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she said finally. What do you mean? For reality to intrude. For you to decide this is too complicated, or for me to remember all the reasons why this probably isn't practical. I turned to face her in the dim light filtering through my bedroom curtains. Do you want it to be practical? No, she said, and her honesty was like a gift. I want it to be real. Then let's just let it be real. Even if real means complicated? Especially if real means complicated. Victoria smiled, and in that moment, lying in my second-hand bed in my imperfect apartment, I understood something I'd never grasped before. Love, or whatever this was becoming, wasn't about fitting into someone else's world or them fitting into yours. It was about creating something new together, something that belonged to both of you and neither of you at the same time. Marcus? I'm glad you made me pasta. I'm glad you stayed to eat it. Outside, Portland settled into its late-night quiet, and I drifted off to sleep with Victoria's head on my shoulder and the certain knowledge that whatever happened next, this moment was exactly where I was supposed to be. 3 months later, I was sitting in Victoria's condo watching her pack for a business trip to San Francisco, marveling at how completely my life had changed. The space that had seemed so intimidating in my imagination was exactly as she'd described. Beautiful, functional, and somehow sterile, despite the expensive furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. You could. Come with me, Victoria said, folding a blazer with the precision of someone who traveled frequently. I have meetings Monday and Tuesday, but we could spend the weekend exploring the city. And do what? Sit in hotel lobbies while you network with other landscape architects? You could see the Museum of Modern Art, visit some galleries, eat at restaurants that would give your roommate nightmares about the prices. I watched her pack with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light despite expensive taste. Everything in her suitcase was coordinated, wrinkle-resistant, appropriate for multiple occasions. It was a level of organization that both impressed and intimidated me. I have the Cascade Brewing project due next week, I said, which was true, but not the whole truth. The real reason I was hesitant about San Francisco was more complicated. Victoria paused in her packing, studying my expression. What's really going on, Marcus? Nothing. I just have work to finish. Bullshit. She sat on the edge of the bed, giving me her full attention. We've been together for 3 months. I can tell when you're avoiding something. I got up from the chair where I'd been watching her pack and walked to the window. The view from the 23rd floor was spectacular. The river, the bridges, the mountains in the distance. It was the kind of vista that real estate agents used to sell million-dollar condos, and standing there always made me acutely aware of the different worlds Victoria and I inhabited. Your business trip isn't really about me, is it? I said finally. You'll be busy, focused on work, meeting with clients who all live in that same professional sphere you operate in. And I'll be the boyfriend who tagged along. The younger guy who doesn't really belong in those conversations. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Is that how you see yourself? As someone who doesn't belong? Sometimes. The admission felt dangerous, like confessing to a weakness that could be used against me. Especially when we're in situations where everyone else is talking about investments and property values and where to send their kids to private school. Those conversations bore me too, you know. But you participate in them. You understand the references, the social codes, the unspoken rules. I'm always playing catch-up, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to know but don't. Victoria stood and joined me at the window. Do you remember that gallery opening? When Robert was being his charming self? Hard to forget. Do you remember what you said about that abstract painting? The one that looked like a storm? I thought back to that evening, which felt both recent and ancient. Something about frustrated potential. You saw something in that painting that no one else commented. On all night. Not the other artists, not the collectors, not the critics. You looked at brushstrokes and color, and saw emotion. Victoria touched my arm gently. That's not about education or social class, Marcus. That's about how your mind works. It's not enough, though. Not for your world. My world? Victoria's tone had shifted, becoming sharper. What exactly do you think my world is? I gestured around the condo at the expensive furniture and the view that probably cost more per month than most people's salaries. This, the gallery openings, The business, dinners, the clients who spend more on landscaping than I make in a year. And you think that's all I am? A collection of expensive things and professional obligations? No, that's not what I meant. Isn't it? Victoria moved away from the window, her packing forgotten. For 3 months you've been waiting for me. To realize you don't fit into some imaginary lifestyle I supposedly require. You've been so busy worrying about not being rich enough or sophisticated enough that you've missed the point entirely. Which is? I chose you, Marcus. Not your bank account, not your social connections, not your ability to discuss wine pairings at dinner parties. You. The person who makes me laugh, who sees beauty in things other people miss, who cooks me pasta in a kitchen the size of my walk-in closet and makes it feel like the most romantic restaurant in the city. Her words hit me with the force of revelation. I had been so focused on what I lacked, money, status, cultural education, that I'd been blind to what I actually brought to the relationship. I'm scared, I said, the truth finally emerging. Not of your world or your money or any of that surface stuff. I'm scared that someday you'll wake up and realize you could have anyone. And you'll wonder what you were thinking about getting involved with some 28-year-old who's still figuring his life out. Victoria crossed the room and took my hands, her touch warm and certain. Marcus, look at me. I met her eyes, seeing something there I hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability mixed with determination. I'm 53 years old, she said. I've dated successful men, wealthy men, age-appropriate men who looked perfect on paper. Do you know what was missing from all of those relationships? I shook my head. Joy, spontaneity. The feeling that I was discovering something new about myself through being with them. Victoria's grip on my hands tightened. You make me feel young in ways that have nothing to do with your age. You make me remember why I fell in love with design in the first place, why I started my own business, why I moved to Portland. You remind me of who I am when I'm not performing the role of a successful professional woman. And if people judge us, if your clients think less of you for being with someone younger, then they're not the kind of clients I want anyway. Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her face. Besides, most of them are too busy worrying about their own relationships to spend much time analyzing mine. I thought about Robert, at the gallery, his obvious disapproval and territorial behavior. What about Robert? What about him? He clearly thinks you're making a mistake with me. Victoria laughed, a sound that was both amused and slightly bitter. Robert thinks any woman who doesn't organize her life around his convenience is making a mistake. His opinion stopped mattering to me about 5 minutes into our first date. But he represents that whole world of people who think, Marcus, stop. Victoria's voice was firm but not unkind. You're creating problems that don't exist. Most of the people in my professional and social circles either don't care who I date or are secretly envious that I found someone who makes me happy. How can you be sure? Because Sarah told me so. At lunch last week, she said watching us together at the gallery reminded her of why she fell in love with her husband 30 years ago. Because my assistant keeps asking when she's going to meet the mystery man who's been making me smile at work. Because my daughter called last week specifically to tell me how happy I sounded. The mention of Victoria's daughter caught my attention. You told Emma about me? I tell Emma about everything important in my life. She's flying in next month, actually. She wants to meet you. The thought of meeting Victoria's daughter, a woman only 3 years younger than me, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through my chest. What did you tell her about me? The truth. That you're kind, talented, and make me happier than I've been in years. She's looking forward to meeting the man who convinced her mother to start cooking again. You've been cooking? Attempting to cook. Remember that disaster I called chicken piccata last week? That was my effort to impress you with domestic skills I don't actually possess. I remembered the meal in question, which had been simultaneously overcooked and undercooked in ways that seemed to defy physics. I thought you were just experimenting with molecular gastronomy. I was experimenting with not ordering takeout every night like I had for the past 5 years. The confession made me smile despite my lingering anxiety. Victoria, successful and sophisticated Victoria, had been trying to impress me with cooking, skills she didn't have. The idea was both touching and absurd. Emma's going to like you, Victoria continued. She has excellent taste in people and a low tolerance for pretension. Plus, she's been worried that I was turning into a workaholic. Hermit, so anyone who gets me out of the office early has her approval. What if she doesn't? Like me, I mean. Then I'll be disappointed in her judgment. But it won't change how I feel about you. The certainty in Victoria's voice was both reassuring and terrifying. She'd made her choice, committed to whatever this relationship was becoming, while I'd been holding back, waiting for permission to fully invest in something that scared me as much as it excited me. Victoria? Yes? I love you. The words escaped before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us like a challenge. It was the first time either of us had said it, and I immediately wondered if it was too soon, too much, too presumptuous. Victoria's smile was radiant. I love you too. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a new kind of fear. Love raised the stakes, made everything more real and more fragile at the same time. Are you sure? I asked. Because once we say it, we can't take it back. I don't want to take it back, do you? No. But loving you means accepting that this is real, that we're building something together instead of just seeing where things go. And that scares you? Terrifies me. But in a good way. Victoria laughed and pulled me closer. Good. If it doesn't terrify you at least a little, it's probably not worth doing. We stood there in her pristine living room, holding each other while the city spread out below us, and I felt something shift inside my chest. The fear was still there, but it was overwhelmed by something stronger. The recognition that whatever complications lay ahead, they were worth navigating together. So, Victoria said, pulling back to look at me. San Francisco? San Francisco, I agreed. But I'm warning you, if your colleagues start talking about golf handicaps, I'm going to start a very loud conversation about graphic design theory. Deal. And Marcus? Yeah? Pack something nice for dinner. I'm taking you to the kind of restaurant that will give Jake nightmares about the prices. How nice? Nice enough that you'll feel slightly overdressed and completely spoiled. Perfect. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a restaurant that probably cost more per meal than I usually spent on groceries, watching Victoria charm a table full of landscape architects while discussing sustainable drainage systems with the passion of someone who genuinely loved her work. She'd introduced me as her boyfriend without qualification or explanation, and not one person had batted an eye. Emma had been everything. Victoria promised, smart, funny, and completely uninterested in our age difference. She'd interrogated me about my intentions with the thoroughness of a protective daughter, but with enough humor to make it feel like inclusion rather than judgment. When she'd hugged me goodbye, she'd whispered, "Thank you for making my mom smile." Like that again. Jake had finally met Victoria properly, beyond the brief dinner introduction, and had grudgingly admitted that she was actually pretty cool for someone who could probably buy our building. They'd bonded over their shared concern for my tendency to overthink everything, forming an unlikely alliance that left me both grateful and slightly nervous. The business trip had been a revelation. Watching Victoria in her professional element, seeing how her colleagues respected her expertise and valued her opinions, had made me understand something fundamental about confidence. It wasn't about having all the answers or fitting into predetermined categories. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked as we walked back to our hotel after dinner. San Francisco stretched around us, all steep hills and twinkling lights, the kind of city that made everything feel possible. How different everything looks now. Different how? 3 months ago, I would have spent that entire dinner convinced. Everyone was judging me, wondering what you were doing with someone like me. Tonight, I was just present, enjoying the conversation, the food, being with you. Victoria squeezed my hand. What changed? I stopped waiting for permission to be happy. From who? From everyone. From you. From society. From some imaginary committee that decides who belongs with whom. I paused as we reached a crosswalk, the city humming with late-night energy around us. I realized that if you love me, really love me, then I must be worth loving. You are worth loving, Marcus. You always were. I know that now. It just took me a while to believe it. We walked the rest of the way to our hotel in comfortable silence, both lost in our own thoughts. The lobby was quiet, elegant in the understated way of expensive hotels, and as we rode the elevator to our floor, I found myself thinking about the future in ways I'd been afraid to before. Victoria? When we get back to Portland, I want to find a new apartment. Something that's just mine, not a shared space with a roommate. Oh? Her tone was carefully neutral, but I could see the question in her eyes. Not because I don't want to spend time at your place, but because I want somewhere that feels like home. Somewhere I can invite you that reflects who I am now, instead of who I was when I was just getting by. Victoria smiled. I think that sounds like an excellent idea. And I want to start saving money. Real money. Not just enough to cover rent and groceries. I want to travel with you, take you places, and contribute more equally to this relationship. Marcus, you don't have to. I want to. Not because I think you expect it, but because I want to be a full partner in whatever we're building together. The elevator doors opened at our floor, and Victoria led the way to our room, fishing the keycard from her purse. Once inside, she turned to face me, her expression serious. Are you sure about this? About us? Because once we start talking about futures and partnerships and building things together, there's no going back to casual dating. I'm sure. Are you? Victoria crossed the room and wrapped her arms around my neck. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Even though I'm 28 and still figuring things out, especially because you're 28 and still figuring things out. You make me want to figure things out too, Marcus. New things, better things. Things I never thought to want before I met you. I kissed her then, deep and certain, tasting possibility and promise on her lips. Outside our hotel window, San Francisco glittered like scattered stars, and I thought about how many people were probably out there right now, wondering if they were brave enough to love someone who didn't fit their expected pattern. Victoria? Yes? Thank you for being brave enough to want me. Thank you for being brave enough to let me. Later, as we lay in the hotel bed listening to the distant sounds of the city, I thought about the coffee shop where we'd first met. How a simple comment about age had changed everything. It seemed impossible that such a small moment could have led to this. To love, to partnership, to a future that neither of us had planned, but both of us wanted. No regrets? Victoria asked softly, her head on my shoulder. None. You? Only that we didn't meet sooner. If we'd met sooner, I wouldn't have been ready for you. And I wouldn't have been ready for you either. Maybe timing is part of the magic. I thought about that as Victoria's breathing deepened into sleep. Timing, courage, the willingness to risk everything for something that might be extraordinary. Age really was just a number, but love. Love was the equation that made all the other numbers irrelevant. In the morning, we'd fly back to Portland and begin the process of building a life together. There would be challenges, questions, moments of doubt from both of us and everyone around us. But lying there in the San Francisco darkness, holding the woman who taught me that love wasn't about fitting together perfectly, but about choosing to create something beautiful together, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. After all, we'd already proven that some of the best things in life happened when you stopped worrying about what made sense and started following what made you happy. And Victoria Whitmore, brilliant and beautiful and brave enough to love a 28-year-old graphic designer who still burned pasta sometimes, made me happier than I'd ever imagined possible. Age was just a number. But love was everything else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.